What's up everybody, welcome to Rotor Riot Workbench. I'm Let's Fly RC, and today we're going to walk you through how to get started with your Fat Shark HD 3-inch starter kit. If you purchased a Fat Shark starter kit from rotorriot.com, we're going to walk you through all the steps you need to go through to get up in the air for the first time. This is everything that comes in your starter kit. Included in your starter kit, you'll receive a Rotor Riot toolkit with a Rotor Riot prop wrench, your Rotor Riot lanyard, antennas for the goggles, of course your Dominator Fat Shark goggles, a battery charger, your radio, and of course the drone with props and battery all inside this box here. Guys, everything in this kit is already flashed to the latest version and should already be bound together. So you shouldn't need to do any firmware updates or any binding to get these drones to work. I'll talk more about this later in the video. The transmitter that comes with your starter kit is the Radiomaster TX12. I have a separate video about this transmitter on the channel. If you want to see a lot more details about this radio, go ahead and check out that video linked in the description. In your TX12 package, you'll receive a quick start guide, sticker sheet, USB cable, and antenna, and of course the TX12 radio itself. The very first thing you want to do with this radio is go ahead and screw on the antenna. It is possible to damage this radio if you power it on without the antenna connected, so make sure the antenna is installed before you power on the radio for the first time. In the USB package you'll find a plug, which is meant to plug the antenna port when you're not using the antenna. We won't be using that today, so put it back in the box and save it for later if you decide you want to use it later. The TX12 radio has two USB ports, one on the top and one in the battery bay compartment when you open this door down here. This USB port at the bottom is used for charging the batteries, and the USB port at the top is used for simulator and for firmware updates. You will use the USB-C cable for these purposes. To charge the battery, simply plug in the USB-C cable to the bottom USB-C port and plug into any USB power source that you might have on the other end. When you see the red light is on, that means it's charging the battery. Let's power up the radio for the first time. To power up the TX12, press and hold the power button until all four squares show up on the screen and you feel a vibration. Then release.
Welcome to HTX. Throttle warning.
If you see throttle warning, lower the throttle stick all the way down to the bottom to remove the warning.
Switch warning.
If you see switch warning, make sure all four of the toggle switches are facing forward or away from you. Once all of the warnings are clear, you should see ELRS INT on the screen, which means we're going to be using the internal ELRS module of this radio. If you don't see ELRS INT on the screen, press the model button, rotate the scroll wheel till you select ELRS INT, press in on the scroll wheel, and press in on the scroll wheel one more time to select the model. Then hit return, and you'll be back on the model page. And you'll now be on the correct model for your drone. In the black box with your drone, you'll find the Rotor Riot FPV Drone Quick Start Guide. This tells you everything you need to know about the transmitter and which switches are assigned to which functions. All of these switches, E, B, C, and F, are all 3-position switches, meaning they have a forward, a center, and a back. Since these are 3-position switches, and we have assigned them to only 2 functions, the forward and center position will have the same state, and it will change states when you switch into the reverse or third position of the switch. Those states will change according to our diagram that we've provided in our Quick Start Guide. For example, switch E is in the disarmed state when it is all the way away from you or in the forward position. It is also disarmed in the center position. And the drone will arm when switch E is switched to the reverse position or towards you. To disarm the drone, flip it either into the center position or the forward position and the drone will disarm. The same goes for the other 4 switches. Switch B in the forward and center positions will put the drone in acro mode. If you flip switch B towards yourself or the reverse position, the drone will switch to level or angle mode. Angle mode will give you self-stabilization. If you lose orientation or if you're a beginner learning how to fly for the first time, angle mode can be helpful to level the drone and bring it back to center when all of your sticks are centered. Switch F is assigned to beeper or buzzer, and if you flip the switch forward or towards you, the drone will start beeping to let you know where the drone is in case you've lost it in a crash. Switch C is the turtle mode or flip over after crash switch. To use it, you'll need to disarm your drone, flip the switch towards yourself, rearm the drone, and then you can use your sticks to flip the drone back over if you've landed upside down. This radio comes defaulted in mode 2, which means that your left stick will control your yaw and your throttle, and your right stick will control your roll and your pitch axis. In order to arm the drone, your throttle will have to be all the way down in the 0 position before you can activate the drone. So if you're arming your drone for the first time and it's not arming, one of the things you should definitely check is to make sure that your throttle stick is all the way down before you go to arm the drone. The drone will also not arm if it's got the beeper activated or turtle mode activated. If your drone isn't arming for some reason, the first thing you should check is to make sure that all of your switches are facing away from you and your throttle stick is all the way down. If you'd like to use this transmitter in a simulator to practice before your first flight, take the USB-C cable, plug it into your computer, and plug it into this port at the very top of your radio. Be sure that the radio is powered on before doing this, and you should see three options come up on screen. Press in on the scroll wheel to select USB joystick, and now your radio is ready to be used with a simulator after you've set it up in their software. To make sure you get maximum range and penetration, and to give you the best experience, it's always best to make sure that your ELRS internal module is set to 250 Hz. A lot of these radios come factory default set to F1000, which is a new protocol meant for racing, but unfortunately in that mode the range is drastically reduced and some people have experienced fluttery flight performance. In order to make sure that your radio is in the proper mode, hold down on the sys key, use the jog wheel to scroll down to Express LRS and press in on the jog wheel. And as you can see here, this radio is set to F1000, which is a new setting for ELRS which allows for faster latency, but unfortunately it drastically reduces the range. In order to change that, we want to press it on the jog wheel, scroll to the left, and go all the way down to 250 Hz. 250 Hz will give you great range and penetration and perfectly acceptable latency. Another thing to be sure of is that you're on maximum power by scrolling down to TX power and selecting it and making sure that you are on 250 milliwatts, which is the maximum output power of the internal module of the Radiomaster TX12. To exit, hit return to go back to the main menu and press and hold return to exit out of the tools menu. Since the battery's low on this radio, I'm going to go ahead and plug it into charge while we're filming the rest of this video so it's ready to go when we're all finished. To do this, I'm going to power down the radio by pressing and holding the power button until all of the squares go away and it vibrates and release. Next, I'm going to open up the battery bay and plug in the USB-C cable to the USB-C port located right here. You should see the power button turn red on the radio to indicate that it's charging. We'll just set this aside and continue with the video. Since we talked about charging batteries, let's go ahead and get our drone batteries charging so when this video is over we can be ready to fly. Go ahead and open the box that houses your drone and your batteries and take out the 3 batteries that were included in the kit. We will also need the included battery charger for this step. At the time of this recording, we have 2 different versions of the 3-inch starter kit, one that has ducts and one that doesn't. And at the time of this recording, we've found that the fuel cell 1500 mAh battery works best with our ducted version, and the Tattoo 850 mAh battery works best with our ductless version. The included AC-powered Toolkit RC battery charger is perfect for charging 4-cell batteries because it has a 4-cell battery port right on the side for balancing your batteries. This port is used to keep all of the cells internally on this 4-cell battery to make them have an equal charge on all 4 cells, which will make them last longer and perform better. A 4-cell battery has 4 individual cells, and this battery charger is specifically designed to charge 4S batteries because the charging port has the exact number of pins for a 4-cell battery, which makes it a very safe charger for charging 4-cell batteries. It can also be used to charge 3-cell and 2-cell batteries as long as you orient the balance port in the proper location. You want to make sure that the negative terminal is all the way to the left-hand side on this balance port when plugging it in if you do charge a 2-cell or 3-cell battery. Since most of the drones you'll be purchasing this battery charger for at Rotor Riot are 4-cell batteries, we're going to walk you through how to charge a 4-cell battery safely and properly with this battery charger. One of the most important safety tips in charging batteries is to be sure to never leave them unattended when charging. These batteries have the potential to start a fire and should always be monitored and charged in a safe location. The Toolkit RC battery charger works both at 120 volts and at 240 volts. Plug it into a power outlet and we'll get started. Before you plug in the battery, be sure that your battery charger is set to the proper charging state depending on how fast you want to charge it and to what voltage you want to end. At the top you'll see the individual cell voltage that your battery will charge to if plugged into the battery charger. 4.2 volts is a standard number that you would regularly want to charge your batteries to. 4.35 volts is only for high voltage batteries and shouldn't be used with these 2 battery types. 3.85 and 3.60 are for storage charging your batteries. The second row here shows you the rate of the charge in amps. And depending on the type of battery you're charging at too high of an amperage can be damaging to your battery. A good rule of thumb is to take the milliamp hour reading of your battery, divide by 1000, and that's considered 1C charge rate. On a 1500 milliamp hour battery, that would be 1.5 amps. And that's what we would want to charge this battery at if we wanted to do it safely. Some people choose to charge their batteries faster, and if you do that, you're taking a risk on damaging your battery over time and possibly even creating a fire. So to charge safely, we always recommend to charge at 1C charge rate, and on a fuel cell 1500, that would be 1.5 amps. On a Tattoo 850, that would be 0.85 amps. This battery charger offers charge rates of 0.5 amps, 1 amp, 2 amps, or 2.5 amps for a maximum charge rate. The fuel cell 1500 milliamp hour battery should be charged at 1 amp to be done safely to be 1C or less, and the Tattoo 850 milliamp hour battery should be charged at 0.5 amps if you want to safely charge the battery at 1C or less. After you have your charger set with the proper in voltage and the proper charge rate, once you plug in the battery, it'll automatically begin to charge. We're going to plug in our XT60 connector into the yellow port on the bottom. Notice there's a pointy end and a square end. Make sure to line it up properly when plugging it in. Next, we'll plug in our balance port. Notice that we have tabs sticking up on one side and metal slots on the other side. Let's line it up so that the metal slots are facing up and plug it in to the 4S battery port. Now, as you can see, the charger has recognized the battery as a 4S battery and has started charging automatically. When the charge is finished, you'll see a green bar at the top of the charger and the words completed to let you know that the battery is finished charging. Now that our battery is finished charging, we can unplug it from the charger and place it into a LiPo safe bag available at rotorriot.com until we're ready to go fly. Be sure to store your batteries in a safe place, preferably in a metal can or a LiPo safe bag, and be sure that when you store your batteries, they are set to a storage charge. Keeping batteries stored in a charged state can be dangerous and make their life expectancy a lot less. To storage charge the battery, set the charger to 3.85 volts and plug in the battery, and it will equalize all the cells and safely storage charge the battery down to 3.6 volts per cell. Repeat this step for all of your other batteries if you wish to fly them all that day. It's a good practice to only charge the number of batteries you intend to fly in your session, so that way you don't have to storage charge them when you get home. Now that we have our transmitter set up and our batteries charging, let's go ahead and set up our goggles for the first flight. In the box you'll have an instruction sheet, a sticker pack, a lens cleaning cloth, and of course, your goggles. In the Fat Shark case you'll have your goggle power cord, some Velcro spacer adapters in case your goggle pad doesn't fit your face well, and of course your goggles. Locate the antennas that came with your drone package, and the first thing we're going to do is install the antennas onto the goggles. Be sure to install these antennas before flying. Technically you could fly with the goggles in this state, but you probably won't get very much range before you lose signal. To do this, we'll simply thread the RPSMA antennas onto the RPSMA ports on the goggles. Be sure not to over-tighten the antennas as you could damage the connectors. The goggles can be tailored to fit your head by peeling back on the Velcro and tightening them to the desired tightness while it's on your head. On my personal goggles, I've actually upgraded to a more comfortable customized goggle strap and customized a face pad available at rotorriot.com. To power your goggles, you'll need this cable and one of the batteries that came with your drone kit. These goggles can support anywhere from 2S to 4S batteries. As you can see here, whatever voltage you put into this connector is what voltage gets sent to the goggles. Be sure not to use 6S batteries with these goggles because you could damage them with overvoltage. To power the goggles, simply plug in the barrel connector, plug in your battery, and press the power button if the goggles don't automatically power up. And after a few seconds, you'll see the splash screen show up in the goggle lenses. On the bottom of the goggles, you'll have your focus adjustment and your IPD adjustment, or your interpupillary distance adjustment. To adjust your focus, rotate the wheel, and to adjust the IPD, move the sliders in and out until you can see the image clearly. You can do this individually for each eye as needed. On the bottom of the goggles, you'll see a USB-C port which can be used for HDMI out, and in the center between the two lenses is your SD card port. It's always a good practice to have an SD card inserted into your goggles and properly formatted in the goggles before flying, because these goggles feature a built-in DVR to record your flights. If you happen to lose your drone in a crash and you don't know where it ended up, having that DVR footage is always a great tool to help you find your missing drone. On the top of your goggles, you have a fan speed adjustment. I personally keep mine at maximum all the time. On the right side above the power cord is a joystick for your internal menu, and in front of the record button is the back button for the menu. Inside this small hole here is the bind button, and you'll use this to bind your goggles to a new drone. If you purchased a starter package from rotorriot.com, your goggles should already be bound to your drone, but just in case, At the end of this video, I'll go over some troubleshooting tips on how to bind your goggles to your drone, so you'll know how to do that just in case your goggles aren't bound to your drone for some reason. If you want to gain even more range and penetration out of your Fat Shark system, we offer upgraded antennas for your goggles and your drone at rotorriot.com, so be sure to check that out if you want to maximize your range and penetration on your Fat Shark system. Now's the fun part. In the box included with your drone, you'll receive 2 sets of propellers, an update cable for your Avatar video transmitter, and 2 carbon fiber pieces that can be used to later upgrade your 3-inch non-ducted drone to the ducted version if you choose. The first most important piece of information to note about this drone is what this tag says right here. Your drone is already tuned. You do not need to update it or change settings in Betaflight before you fly. In today's electronic world, it's very common for your products to need a firmware update right out of the box. The first thing your video game system or TV set does when you plug it in is update its software, so it's natural to think that you might need to update firmware or software before using a product for the first time. Unfortunately, when you do that with an FPV drone, it erases all of the settings and tune that's built into the device and starts it from scratch. We've already done that for you. If you've already updated the firmware on your drone at this point, reach out to support@rotorriot.com and we can help get you back into a flying state. Sometimes we purposely keep our drones on a previous version of firmware because they fly better or because of bugs in the software. To get you up and flying for the first time, no changes are needed to the software on the drone. Everything should be tuned and ready to go for your first flight. There's no need to update anything. It's always a good idea before installing the props to ensure that the drone is bound and ready to go for your first flight. So before we install the propellers, let's grab our transmitter, our batteries, and our goggles to make sure that everything is operating the way it should before installing propellers. If you're going to be doing these tests on the bench, it's also a really good practice to put a fan on your video transmitter because it will get very hot during this process. For our first test, let's power up the radio by pressing and holding the power button until we feel the vibration and then let go. Next, we'll install our battery into the battery strap. I like to install mine with all of the wiring tucked under the battery strap and tightly locked in place to prevent it from accidentally getting chopped by the propellers. Then we can plug in the drone and see if the radio is communicating. You should hear a series of tones indicating that the flight controller is ready to go. If your goggles aren't powered up, your receiver will be flashing green, indicating that it's searching for connection with the goggles. If your radio is transmitting to the receiver, you should see a solid light on the receiver, indicating that the transmitter and the receiver are bound and connected and ready to go. To test the function, to make sure that the drone will arm properly, ensure that your throttle is all the way down, all of your switches are facing forward, and arm the drone by pressing upwards on the switch labeled E. The motors should spool up to indicate that the drone is armed. If you notice your motors are spooling up on the bench without props on, this is totally normal. Don't worry, just disarm the drone and move on to the next step. This is happening because the flight controller is expecting the drone to be flying through the air and it isn't reacting to the outputs that the flight controller is sending. So the flight controller is increasing the velocity of the motors to compensate for actions that aren't happening. Sounds really good. If for some reason the ELRS receiver in your drone is not bound to the radio, I'm going to quickly show you how to pair the two together using a process we call the 3 plug-in process. To bind the receiver in the drone to the ELRS transmitter in the radio using the 3 plug process, you'll first need to power on the radio.
Welcome to HTX. Switch warning.
Make sure all warnings are cleared. Hold the sys key. Use the scroll wheel to scroll down to Express LRS and click in on the scroll wheel to select. Rotate the scroll wheel to the right to scroll down to Bind. And after we enable bind mode on the drone, we will be pressing in on the scroll wheel to select bind. But we need to prepare for this ahead of time so that it's ready. To put the receiver into bind mode, we need to quickly power cycle the drone 3 times, leaving it connected on the 3rd plug-in. You need to do it at this speed. If you've done this correctly, you should see a double flash sequence on the receiver indicating that it's in bind mode. And now that you're in bind mode, you can press in on the scroll wheel to bind to the drone. After a few seconds, the receiver will stop flashing and have a solid LED to indicate that it is bound to the radio. To exit the menu, press and hold the return key, and press and hold the return key one more time to completely exit out of the tools menu. In this particular drone, we've installed the Foxier ELRS receiver, and it has a cool RGB LED that changes colors depending on its state. There's another way to bind your receiver to your radio using a binding phrase, and I'll make a separate video explaining that method. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel and keep an eye out for that video coming soon. A quick way to confirm that your receiver in your drone is now bound to the radio is to use the beeper command. And that's how you bind your ELRS receiver to your ELRS transmitter on the TX12. We can verify the beeper function by pressing up on the F switch. We can test turtle mode by flipping back the C switch, ensuring that our drone is disarmed, and now arming the drone. And using the roll and pitch stick, we should be able to see the motors rotating when we move the stick. And that's how you know that turtle mode is working. To turn off turtle mode, disarm the drone, turn off turtle mode, and now if you arm the drone, you'll be back in normal operation again. Testing angle mode is a little bit more tricky on the bench without props, but you can still test its function by listening to the sound of the motors. To do that, arm the drone, and then activate angle mode, and you'll hear the pitch change on the motors. There's one more safety procedure that you could try before putting props on a drone to ensure that your drone is going to perform properly. Activate turtle mode, arm the drone. If you move the stick to the right motor should spool up. If you move the stick to the left motor should spool up. If you move the stick forward, the front motor should spool up. And if you move the stick backwards, the back motor should spool up. Now disarm the drone, take it out of turtle mode. Now your drone is ready to install the propellers. Let's disconnect the battery for safety, power down the radio by pressing and holding the power button, and install the propellers. We'll do this with our Rotor Riot prop wrench included in the package. I have a separate video on this channel explaining everything you need to know about installing propellers in the correct orientation, so be sure to go and watch that video, linked in the description, if you want more information about propeller direction and proper propeller installation. Let's take one package of our propellers and remove 4 of the propellers. Inside the package you'll also have some little clear adapters. We won't be using those adapters as those are meant for a different type of motor mounting. There are 2 different types of propellers, as you can see in the propeller installation guide. There are clockwise propellers and counterclockwise propellers in your kit. Be sure to match up the shape of the propeller to the shape on the propeller installation guide in order to install them in the proper orientation. If you install your propellers incorrectly, your drone will freak out and not fly properly. Your propellers have a top and a bottom, and it is also important to be sure that your propellers are installed in the proper orientation, including not installing them upside down. To note the top of the propeller, there will be numbers and/or letters embossed on one or more of the blades. Now we can easily figure out which location on the drone each propeller should go. Loosen the prop nut on one motor at a time with the prop wrench and take the propeller corresponding to that motor and press it down hard over the shaft until it bottoms out. Now we can reinstall the prop nut. Be sure to tighten the prop nut sufficiently so that the prop does not spin while holding the motor. When I tighten the propellers, I like to hold the motor and the prop like this to give me sufficient grip while tightening. To verify that our goggles are properly bound to the drone, let's power up the goggles by using the included cable and battery that came with your drone. And now let's power up the drone. After a few seconds of boot sequence, you should be able to see an image in your goggles coming from the camera on your drone. If you don't see an image in your goggles from your drone after about 20 seconds, you may need to rebind the goggles to the drone. In order to do that, you'll need a sharp object, such as a SIM card tool for a cellular phone, to press on the bind button on the goggles. You should hear beeping coming from the goggles. And then, using the 2.5mm hex driver included in your Rotor Riot toolkit, reach in from the back and press on the little black button on the back of your video transmitter. After a couple seconds, the goggles should stop beeping and the drone will be bound to the goggles. You should be able to now see the image of your camera in the goggles. In order to ensure you're getting the maximum performance out of your video system, I'm going to walk you through a couple steps you can perform in your goggles to maximize the output performance and increase the range of your goggles. The goggles and transmitter generally come factory default to a low power setting because some countries and some regions require specific power output settings to be adhered to in order to follow the law. If you're in an area where your regulations allow for higher output power, I'm going to show you how to do that in the goggle menu. This joystick allows access to the goggle menu. Press in on the joystick to access the goggle menu. You'll see that you'll have access to 4 different channels in the goggle menu. I'll record a separate video on how to access even more channels, so keep an eye out for that video coming soon. If you wish to change channels, press in on the joystick to select channel, press forward and backward on the joystick to select the desired channel, and then press in on the joystick to select that channel. You can press the back button to exit the channel menu. Now you can use the joystick to select the share or the settings options. If you press in on the joystick, you will select the settings menu. Now you can use the joystick to select different options in the settings menu. The first option that I want to point out is the transmitter power. You can increase your transmitter power from 25 milliwatts all the way up to 700 milliwatts for maximum range and penetration. You can also change the resolution, the bit rate, the frame rate, and a lot of other features in the menu. For best range and penetration, we recommend a transmitter power of 700 milliwatts, a resolution of 720p, a standard bit rate, and high frame rate for the lowest latency. To exit the goggle menu, continuously press on the back button until you have completely exited the menu. Now that we've verified that our goggles and transmitter are bound to the drone, and that our drone functions properly while on the bench, it's time to go for our first test flight. Before you try to take off on your first flight, it's always a good practice to verify that the drone is oriented correctly so that it doesn't freak out on your first flight. Don't be like me and do this in your kitchen. Take your drone out to an open field or a very safe place with a lot of open space for this test. Start by arming the drone and verifying that it doesn't freak out and fly away. Be ready to disarm quickly if something happens. Your drone should sound nice and smooth and not have any chattering or weird behaviors. Once you've verified that your drone can arm and disarm safely without any freakouts, we can test to make sure that our controls are oriented properly. Before taking your first flight, verify your transmitter is set up correctly. Arm it once again, and very slightly pitching forward to verify the drone pitches forward. Very slightly pitch backwards to verify the drone pitches backwards. Roll left and roll right to make sure that the drone responds as it's expected. After verifying that your drone is reacting properly to your stick inputs, it's now time to take your first flight. Congratulations on your starter kit from Rotor Riot, and happy flying! Thanks for watching, guys. Let us know in the comments if you purchased a Rotor Riot starter kit, which one did you get? And if this video was helpful, be sure to like and subscribe so you can see more content like this. I'm Let's Fly RC, and we'll see you next time on Rotor Riot Workbench.